All right, YouTube. Netanyahu's in a little bit of a pickle over in Israel. His party only has a one-seat majority, and that's not particularly good. You know, at any time someone could kick the bucket, someone gets like recalled, somebody, something happens, and there's a slot left open, and he gets fucked. He's a prime minister of Israel, but only just barely. And Netanyahu originally wanted to party with the Zionist Union, which is called a centrist party, even though they believe in expanding their settlements, running blockades, and bombing hospitals. So I'm not exactly sure why they're considered a centrist party. I guess in Israel that passes as centrism. Who would have thought? But Lieberman, Avigdor Lieberman, is the man he has billed as defense minister. Now, there's an outgoing defense minister, and a lot of people apparently don't have a problem with the outgoing minister and want to keep him in his position. Something like 70% almost of Israelis, which actually I think that's to their credit. We should give them a little bit of credit for thinking that Lieberman is a little bit of a let's say a little bit genocidal. You see, he wants to not just target the hospitals or roads or power stations or whatever in Palestinian land. Not only does he want to continue the settlement building, which like Hood and the Zionist Union both obviously agree with too. He also wants to bomb like gas stations and everything else, totally civilian bits of infrastructure. His idea seems to be like kill them all, let God sort them out. Now, if a country pursues this policy against a symmetric foe that's actually a threat against its existence, I don't particularly have a problem with that. The thing is that a bunch of rock-throwing Palestinians, and indeed even Hamas itself, is not an existential threat to the nation of Israel. It never has been. It never will be. These are a handful of militants using primitive weapons that are only in existence still, let's face it, because the Israelis have given them the propaganda material necessary to continue recruiting. That is, if you make people miserable by blocking off their entire country and won't even let aid get in, they eventually at some point they're going to start fighting. But Lieberman, who lives in a settled part of the West Bank anyway, it lives in a sort of fortified Jewish neighborhood there, appears to want to simply commit wholesale genocide. Now, those of us who have been awake for some time, who understand what's actually going on in that part of the world, who understand the differentiation between an actual Talmud-thumping Jew and somebody who simply says, well, I'm an Israeli, therefore you can't criticize me. Those of us who realize the butchery that's going on over there have realized for a long time that the so-called centrists and the so-called secularists that run Israel are just as butcherous as people like Avigdor Lieberman. However, a lot of people in the West are unaware of this. A lot of them, especially the evangelicals, they think Israel can do no wrong because what they see on TV every day is us poor suffering Israelis, all of our enemies want to nuke us off the face of the earth. Now, while that's not actually true and it's not actually rational, certainly I can't fault them for believing that propaganda that they see because that's all they ever ingest. But here you have someone who might become the defense minister of the state of Israel who is not he's not making a thinly veiled threat of attacking civilians. He's not using the same old excuses usually used by people like Netanyahu, which is they'll attack civilians and say, oh, well, only Hamas died because they were using this orphanage was a Hamas structure somehow. He's not even trying to cover it up. He's just saying, oh, fuck them. We're just going to start bombing them anyway. And this could be the next defense minister of the state of Israel. There's a reason why people in most parts of the world feel negatively towards the state of Israel. It's not because it's Jewish. It's not because Jews happen to be there. It's because of the way in which the Jewish government there treats its neighbors. Now, Netanyahu and people like him, they're not devout Judaists who sort of, they practice this keep to yourself methodology after thousands of years of being oppressed. Most people, like Netanyahu and most of his contemporaries, they're Eastern Europeans and Russians. They're not Sephardic individuals. They're not from the Middle East. If they have any Middle Eastern blood at all, it's like one great-great-great-grandparent, 150 years ago was kind of from the Middle East, was like half Jordanian or something. And that's really all the bloodline they have associated with this region. Those that are actually authentically, ethnically Jewish, and by which I mean people largely suppressed out of power there, are suffering just as much as the Palestinians and have more in common with them than some of these Israelis that are actually in power. I feel sorry for the Palestinians because they're constantly being bombarded. I also feel very sorry for certain minority groups within Israel because they're going to be tarred with the same feather, whether it's by the Shiite militias or by the world of Islam at large, or whether it's by like nationalists or neo-Nazis or something. Jew in general, Jews, plural, gets tarred with the same feather without people realizing that, yes, there are Jewish pacifists that are there that suffer just as much as the Palestinians do. There are also Israelis that are Arabic. They're not even Jewish. So it's kind of a complicated scenario. I think it's rather concerning that Netanyahu, after trying to wine and dine this other party, was basically told to go fuck himself, I guess, has turned to about the most hardline individual he could possibly scrape up off the bottom of the barrel of genocidal maniacs to actually be the minister of defense for the state of Israel. I mean, this, if any other country that we had dealings with were to appoint someone who has said the things that Avigdor Lieberman has said, and had the experience that he has, which is very little. He was like police. He wasn't military. And even Netanyahu himself some time ago was like, oh, well, he doesn't have any understanding of military affairs because he's never been involved with this shit. If any other country were to do this, the first reaction, I think, from most of the Western world would be shock. Well, this must be a tin horn regime because they're making an obvious mistake here because this person doesn't even know what they're doing. The second would be outrage. They would say, why would any sane nation appoint someone to such a position who has said the sort of things he said? Bombing civilian gas stations, I'm sure that will go over well. See, the nation of Israel, the people there, the reason that they're under threat at all is because the state of Israel's government, not the people, but the government that only represents a small majority of Israelis anyway. It sort of ignores the Arabic Jews there. It sort of ignores the ethnic Jews there and sort of favors, I guess, kind of the Orthodox Jews and, of course, the Khazarians, the Ashkenazi. I would think that their actions, especially if they appoint somebody like this, are going to inflame the situation. Now, you can't convince an evangelical of this because their pastor tells them every weekend, give more money to Israel. And you can't convince somebody who's like a so-called conservative of this because they're like, oh, well, Bush told me a decade ago that I should support this nation no matter what they do. At that, there would be people in the United States, and it almost makes me sad to hear this. There are people here who would unironically be like weeping with joy if the state of Israel were to suddenly start nuking many of its neighbors. They don't know anything about these cultures that are around Israel, and yet they hate them completely because they've been told that they're all against them. Whether it's the Jordanians that are sort of partners with Israel, the Saudi Arabians who are great partners with Israel, the Egyptians who kind of turn a blind eye, and Avigdor Lieberman, the other thing, he talked about bombing Egypt. Why the hell would any sane person in Israel want to bomb the Egyptians? The Egyptians have been one of the best modern friends of the state of Israel and have largely cooperated, left them alone, and tried to trade with them and hold back militants from entering Israel through their connection to Gaza. The Egyptians have been a fairly good friend of the state of Israel. So for Avigdor Lieberman to say, oh, we're going to bomb them too, that's crazy talk. You're going to end up seeing Israel isolated from its regional allies, and it does have them. Not every state that has a border with Israel or is in the region hates the Israelis. You're thinking of militias within Lebanon and the government of Syria primarily, and to a lesser extent kind of the Shiites in Iraq that have a stick up their ass about Jews. The Jordanians don't give a fuck. The Egyptians don't give a fuck either. The government of Lebanon doesn't give a fuck, and the Saudis love them to death because they keep the oil sales up and help them get modern weapons from the United States. So I think Netanyahu's making a little bit of a mistake here. I think that you might have a little bit of a problem, especially with the Europeans. The Europeans, especially the Swedes, are already like, what the fuck are the Israelis doing? Now they're promising that they're going to guard the next aid flotilla they send to Gaza. The Israelis then have to choose, well, are we going to try to waylay Swedish naval vessels? Well, the Swedes certainly don't have the military capability on their own to do butt-fuck anything about the nation of Israel. Israel could wipe Sweden off the face of the earth very easily. But then again, they're partnered with all these other European nations, and that's a little bit different. It would be a little bit different if it was, say, France suddenly sending a flotilla, or maybe the UK, or Germany, although Germany would never do it. They're too cocked to care about the Palestinians. They think they've got to pay the Jews no matter what happens in the state of Israel. And it's weird. Avigdor Lieberman is sort of like Kim Jong-un level crazy. And he's going to be the defense minister of the state of Israel. And then Benjamin Netanyahu will stand there and wonder, well, why do people hate us so? And yet you've got a dude who's talking about bombing the Egyptians, bombing gas stations, bulldoze all of Palestine. That's crazy talk. No sane nation would talk that way. It sounds a little bit like Venezuela when it was talking about Guyana. It's really no different, and I'm going to apply the same ethos to it as I would to someone like Maduro saying, oh, Essequibo is ours, or something like that, or, Kim Jong-un, oh, Korea will reunify, and by the way, it'll be mine, it'll be communist. It's the same exact sort of bullshit. That's about all. Peace out.